Music snow fell like torn feathers from a wounded sky, drifting across the wide and empty prairie. The earth lay wrapped in silence, a silence so heavy it seemed to bury breath itself. The cabin stood alone on the ridge, its timbers blackened by years of wind and storm, its roof bent beneath the weight of winter. And there, in the whitening hush, a woman lay broken. Her body was twisted where the snow had softened to accept her, her dress torn and stiff with cold, her hair spread like ink upon the white ground. She breathed in shallow threads, each one a battle, her legs' cry shattered, refused her even the dignity of standing. The storm had not done this to her. Men had, men with eyes like frost and hands that struck without mercy. They had left her in the snow, as though she were a branch broken from a tree, something to rot and vanish beneath the drifts. Beside her knelt her eldest child, a girl of 7 years, thin as a reed, her cheeks raw from the wind. In her small arms she clutched 2 swaddled infants, their cries high and weak, swallowed by the gale. She tried to shield them with her own narrow body, pressing her chin against their foreheads, as if warmth could be willed into them by the force of her love. Her eyes, wide and too old for such a face, moved from her mother's lips to the empty whiteness where the men had gone, as though she might see them return. The snow had already swallowed their tracks. Only the memory of their boots remained, the crunch, the mocking voices that declared the children gone. The woman worthless, the world indifferent. The woman's lips trembled with words that barely reached the air. Not prayers, not curses, but the simplest plea. Hold on. Her voice caught in her throat. Each syllable a fragment of her soul handed to her daughter. She tried to lift an arm toward the girl, but pain burned through her bones, stealing strength, forcing her hand to fall back helplessly. Her heart etched with the knowledge that her body could no longer do what it was made to do: carry her children, shield them, move them from harm's way. She wanted to tell her daughter she was proud. She wanted to tell her she was sorry. She wanted to tell her the story of how love endures even when flesh fails. But her lips only quivered against the sting of cold. The girl adjusted the bundles in her arms, pulling her siblings closer, and then leaned over her mother as if to cover her with the same small shelter she offered the newborns. Her tears froze before they fell, clinging like tiny diamonds to her lashes. The wind whipped her hair into wild knots, but she did not move. She would not leave. There's no place to go, no arms waiting, no fire nearby. She had only this moment and the fragile weight of those depending on her. The world seemed determined to erase them, to let snow bury this family until nothing remained but silence. Yet in the tree line beyond the ridge, a shadow lingered, tall, broad, half hidden in the sway of the pines. He had watched the cruelty unfold from afar, unseen by the men who carried out their violence. He had seen boots slam against fragile bones, seen a child scream in terror and defiance, seen cruelty leave its brand on the snow. He did not move while they were near, for he had learned long ago that the wolf shows its teeth only when the timing is sure. Now, as the prairie exhaled its cold breath, he stepped forward, heavy boots pressing deep into the drifts, leaving marks that would not vanish so quickly. But the woman did not see him yet. Her eyes, clouded with pain, searched the face of her daughter. She tried to smile through her brokenness, tried to gift that child a memory stronger than the sight of her fallen mother. The smile wavered, faint as candle light against the storm. Still, it was there. The girl bent low, whispering words meant only for the newborn's ears. Promises of safety she did not know how to keep. The snow gathered around them like a shroud, the sky darkening as if even the sun turned away. In the distance, the neighbor widow stood in the shadow of her own doorway, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She had seen the men ride away, had heard the cries carried on the wind, her heart etched with a guilt she could not conquer. Fear bound her feet to her threshold, fear of those men, fear of what standing against them might cost. She pressed a hand to her lips, eyes wet, and told herself the Lord would send another, someone braver, someone stronger. Then she closed the door, shutting out the sound of children crying. The broken woman coughed, the taste of iron on her tongue. Memories flashed behind her eyes, the life before this moment, the laughter of children, the meadow, the warmth of summer sun on her back. She remembered the words of a man who once promised to care for her, only to cast her aside when hardship bent her spirit. She remembered how easily cruelty had disguised itself as strength, and now with her legs shattered, she felt those lies closing in once more, that she was nothing, that her children would vanish into the emptiness of the prairie. Yet even as despair threatened, she sensed the air shift, a presence drawing near, steady, deliberate. Her daughter looked up first, her eyes wide as they caught sight of a figure parting the snow. A man, vast as the pines behind him, his hair long and tangled with frost, his beard thick, his coat heavy with the weight of wilderness. He moved without haste, each step carrying the quiet certainty of one who does not ask permission of the world. His gaze fell on the woman, then on the children, and it did not waver. The girl clutched her siblings tighter, pressing back against her mother's side. She did not know if this stranger meant safety or another wound. The man stopped a few paces away, lowering himself into the snow, so his eyes met hers, not towering, not threatening, but steady. He said nothing, the storm howled around them, yet his silence was louder, a presence that filled the frozen air. Slowly he reached into his coat and drew out a blanket thick and worn, smelling of pine smoke. He laid it across the girl's shoulders with care, as if crowning her with warmth. The woman's breath caught, her eyes opening wider, tears spilling even as the cold stung them. She saw him clearly now, not as a phantom in the trees, but as flesh and bone. His hands were scarred, his face weathered. Yet there was something unyielding in him, something that did not break when the world pressed too hard. He looked at her shattered legs, at the children trembling in their sister's arms, and though he spoke no words, a vow seemed to hang unspoken in the air between them. The snow thickened, the storm deepened, but a shift had come. Cruelty had left her broken in the ashes of winter, but something else stood before her now. The woman closed her eyes, the faint trace of that smile still on her lips. She did not know yet what the stranger would bring, but she knew this. For the first time since the boots crushed her bones, she was not alone. The cabin lay hidden deep within the pines, its roof heavy with snow, smoke curling from a crooked chimney into the silver air. Inside the fire crackled, its warmth struggling against the cold that seeped through every seam. The mountain man carried the woman across the threshold with a care that belied his size, lowering her onto a bed of furs beside the hearth. His movements were steady, reverent, as though she were carved from fragile glass rather than flesh. Her daughter, still clutching the two newborns, hovered close, torn between fear of the stranger and relief at the fire's glow. The man knelt, unwrapping the snow-crusted blanket he had wrapped around them all, and spread it wide before the flames. The children's cries softened, soothed by the rhythm of crackling wood. The woman stirred, her breath shallow, her voice a whisper too faint to carry. She looked at the man's scarred hands as he laid a pot across the fire. His knuckles were split from years of axe and stone, but his touch was gentle. Every motion waited with patience. He did not speak. Words he seemed to believe were smaller than deeds. He fetched water from a jug, sprinkled dried herbs into it, and let the steam rise in fragrant clouds. The girl, watching him closely, kept her distance, her eyes suspicious, her little body braced as if ready to flee. She had already learned not all men could be trusted, that some voices promised safety, but carried ruin. Yet this one did not reach for her nor force himself near. He simply placed a carved wooden cup on the floor and pushed it gently toward her with the back of his hand. Her small fingers twitched, but she did not move. Only when the newborn, in her arms, whimpered did she lean forward, snatch the cup, and hold it to her mother's lips. The woman drank a thin sip, then coughed, but her eyes softened, following the steam upward as though it carried her spirit with it. The mountain man rose, taking a strip of cloth and warming it by the fire before pressing it gently against her swollen leg. Pain flickered through her expression, but she did not cry out. She had no tears left. She only watched him with eyes that asked a question she did not have strength to voice. Why help? When so many turned away, the answer lived in his silence. His life had carved it into him. That words are wind, but care endures. He shifted to the girl's level, squatting low, his wild hair falling into his eyes. He gestured softly toward the corner where a small cradle stood, handmade from rough pine. The girl shook her head fiercely, clutching the infants tighter. He did not press. Instead, he drew something from beneath his coat. A little horse carved from wood, the kind a child might set on a window sill. Its edges were smooth, polished by years of handling. He set it down between them and leaned back, letting it rest in the firelight. The girl's eyes darted to it, then back to him, suspicion flickering into curiosity. She did not take it, but her grip on the infants eased. The woman's breathing slowed, her eyelids heavy, though pain kept her from full rest. She could feel the weight of her brokenness, could feel it pressing like chains into the bed of furs. Her voice broke as she whispered, not to him but to the room itself, that she was nothing now, her body ruined, her children needing more than she could give. The mountain man paused, his hand resting on her leg as though listening to her bones speak. He did not argue, did not offer empty comfort. Instead, he rose and tended the fire again, feeding it slowly, steady as a heartbeat. Actions answered what words could not. That in this cabin she was not nothing. The door creaked open, and a gust of snow swirled in, carrying with it another figure. The old trader, stooped and wrapped in furs, stepped carefully into the light. His eyes fell on the woman, and sorrow shadowed his face. He had known her once in passing, known her laughter before it had been stolen. He set a small bundle on the table, herbs, bandages, a flask of honey. His voice, rough but kind, murmured blessings. He glanced at the mountain man and gave a nod, the sort that passed between men who had endured solitude. Without asking questions, he helped grind the herbs, wrapping them in cloth for pickuses. He did not linger long. Age made him restless in the cold. With a quiet farewell, he stepped back into the storm, leaving behind only the scent of pine and smoke. The girl followed every motion, her sharp little eyes never resting. At last, exhaustion loosened her guard. She placed the infants into the crude cradle, layering them in furs the mountain man offered. Their tiny cries softened into sighs. She lowered herself onto the rug, her body folding like a bird that flown too far. The carved horse lay at her side, forgotten yet present. The mountain man watched her, then returned to the woman. He placed the puces along her leg, binding them with steady hands. The woman grimaced, but she did not turn away. Her eyes held his searching, measuring, trying to find deceit and finding none. The night deepened. Snow lashed the shutters. The wind howled against the chimney. Yet inside a fragile calm gathered. The fire spread its warmth across the wooden walls, the smell of herbs and pine filling the air. The mountain man sat near the flames, whittling another shape from a scrap of wood, his knife moving in slow, sure strokes. His presence filled the room, not like thunder, but like stone unmoving, a foundation beneath a house ready to crumble. The woman, weak but awake, whispered that she did not deserve saving. Her voice cracked under the weight of those words, heavy with years of being told the same. The mountain man lifted his gaze from the wood and studied her face. He did not answer with words. He reached across the floor, took a burning branch from the fire, and lit a second flame in a smaller lamp, setting it by her bed. 2 lights now glowed in the cabin, one beside him, one beside her. It was a gesture so simple it cut her to the bone, a sign that she was not meant to fade into darkness. The girl stirred in her sleep. The carved horse clutched against her chest. The newborns murmured softly, their breaths tiny clouds in the lamplight. The woman felt her heart split open with both despair and something unfamiliar, something like hope. For the first time since her legs had been broken, she let her body lean fully into the furs, letting the weight of her fear slide from her shoulders. The mountain man returned to his seat by the fire, his knife still moving, his eyes steady, never leaving her entirely. Outside the storm raged, but within cabin a new quiet gathered. It was not peace yet, not safety fully earned, but it was a shelter against the winter. And as the flames flickered, casting their shadows across the log walls, the woman realized this man had made a vow without ever speaking it. A vow that trembled in the air like an unstruck chord waiting to sound. She closed her eyes, her breath shaking, and in that fragile silence, she wondered if perhaps the world had not abandoned her after all. Morning seeped into the cabin like a shy visitor, pale light slipping through the frost that laced the window panes. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness that felt too fragile to trust. The woman lay propped against a stack of furs, her hair uncombed, her face hollowed by pain. The fire still burned low in the hearth, its glow painting shadows on the beams above. She listened to the soft breathing of her children, the newborns bundled together in the cradle. The girl curled beside them with a wooden horse still clutched tight in her hand. Their fragile harmony made her heart ache, for she knew she had nothing left to give them, but what little strength her voice could carry. The mountain man moved quietly about the room, his presence heavy yet strangely unobtrusive. He stoked the fire with fresh logs, stirred a pot of porridge, and mended a crack in the chair by the wall. His silence filled the space, not with absence, but with weight, a reminder that someone was here, watching, steady as the earth beneath the snow. She could not decide if it was comfort or burden. His patience frightened her almost as much as his strength. She had lived too long under the shadow of men who mistook cruelty for power, who struck and left her shattered. How could she trust this one when trust had cost her so much already? Her eyes drifted to her legs beneath the blankets. The ache radiated up her body like fire, smoldering through bone. She whispered to herself that she was ruined, that no one would ever see her as whole again. In her heart, she believed she had become a weight too heavy for anyone to bear. When the mountain man placed a bowl of porridge near her hands, she murmured those words aloud, though her voice broke against them. "I am nothing now, just a burden." He paused, his scarred fingers resting against the rim of the bowl. His gaze met hers, not sharp but steady, like a river stone holding back the current. He did not argue, did not soften her words with easy denial. Instead, he drew a stool near her bed and sat, his body a wall of silence between her despair and the room's stillness. He ate a spoonful himself before offering her the next, as if to show her there was no shame in needing help. She let him feed her, though shame burned behind her eyes. Each bite tasted of both hunger and humiliation. And yet beneath it all there was something else, something like the beginning of trust. The girl stirred from her sleep, her hair tangled, her cheeks flushed from warmth rather than wind. She blinked at the firelight, then climbed into her mother's side, her thin arms wrapping around her waist with fierce devotion. The mountain man rose and busied himself at the table, giving them privacy without leaving. The girl whispered that she had dreamed of a field with tall grass where the newborns laughed instead of cried. She said the mountain man was there, too, holding them as if they belonged him. The woman wept silently, the sound muffled against her daughter's hair, for a child's dream held more hope than her waking heart dared. Later that day, the preacher passed through, drawn by rumor of a storm. He was a thin man with a lying face, his voice gentle but worn. He prayed over the woman, his words flowing like a stream, searching for stone to shape. He spoke of God's mercy, of resilience, of burdens shared. She listened but felt a distance between his promises and the rawness of her bones. The mountain man stood in the corner, arms folded, saying nothing. When the preacher finished, he thanked him with a nod, but his silence lingered heavier than any sermon. The preacher left, his footprints filling quickly with snow, leaving the cabin wrapped once more in quiet. It was that quiet which shaped the days. The mountain man worked with his hands, carving, mending, chopping wood. The girl shadowed him at times, her suspicion slowly melting into fascination as he whittled animals from its scraps, leaving them on the window sill for her. The woman watched from her place on the bed, feeling both sorrow and gratitude mingle within her. She had lived long enough to know that kindness could vanish, that warmth could turn cold without warning. And yet, each night when the mountain man placed another log on the fire and checked the bindings on her legs, she felt a thread binding her more tightly to life. Still guilt knotted at her. She told him once, her voice breaking under the weight of it, that she should have died in the snow, that the children would have been better in another's care. He turned his head toward her slowly, his beard catching the glow of firelight. His eyes held no anger, no judgment, only a depth she could not measure. He set down his knife, unfinished, carving in his palm, and placed it beside her pillow. It was a tiny cradle, rough-edged, but made with care. He left it there without a word and returned to the fire. She held it in her trembling hand long after he had turned away, her tears staining the wood until it glistened. One evening, as the newborns whimpered in their sleep, the girl climbed into the mountain man's lap without asking. He froze at first, his large hands hovering awkwardly as if unsure what to do. But when she pressed her cheek against his chest, he let out a breath that seemed to carry years of loneliness. His arms closed around her, steady, careful, and she sighed, as if she had found at last the strength she had been pretending to hold alone. The woman watched with her hand pressed to her lips, her heart breaking and mending at the same time. The cabin grew softer in those days, though outside the snow still ruled. The silence between them remained, but it was no longer emptiness. It became a language of its own. Acts of care, glances held a second longer than necessary, the steady rhythm of footsteps moving across the wooden floor. The woman began to wonder if silence could hold more truth than words ever had. Yet doubt lingered like a shadow. She feared what would happen when the world outside Preston again, when cruelty remembered where it had left her broken. One night, as the wind howled against the eaves, the mountain man set aside his tools and sat near the cradle, rocking one of the infants with a gentleness that defied his size. The girl leaned against his side, her eyes half closed, whispering that he felt like a father. The words fell softly, but struck like thunder in the woman's heart. Her breath caught, her tears hot against her cheeks. She turned her face away, ashamed to let him see her break. But the mountain man had already heard. His gaze lifted toward her, steady and unflinching, as if he had been waiting for those words all along. In that moment, the silence weighed heavier than ever, not as emptiness, but as promise, hovering like a storm ready to break. And as the fire crackled low, the woman knew that something had shifted forever, though she could not yet name what it was. The storm came down like a living thing, tearing across the ridge with a voice that drowned the forest. Snow slammed against the cabin walls, rattling the shutters, bending the chimney smoke sideways into the night. The mountain man moved through the cabin with his usual steadiness, checking the fire, tightening the door latch, laying an axe within reach. The woman lay against the furs, her children pressed to her side, every howl of the wind twisting through her body like a knife. The little girl clutched the wooden horse in her fist, eyes wide and unblinking, as if she too could feel the storm was not only weather, but warning. The mountain man paused at the window, his frame outlined in firelight, his gaze cut into the swirling white outside, searching for shapes that did not belong to snow. He had known storms had lived inside their jaws, but something in this one carried menace deeper than nature's. When he turned back, the silence between them had changed. Even the newborns whimpered as though they sensed a presence pressing closer. Then it came, the sound of hooves breaking through the gale, muffled but certain. The girl stiffened, clinging tighter to her siblings. The woman's breath faltered, her memory uncoiling with sudden clarity. The sound of boots in the snow, voices heavy with cruelty, the crack of bone under merciless hands. Her body trembled, though she could not move. The door shook beneath the pounding of fists, and laughter seeped through the cracks, sharp and cold. The rancher's voice cut into the cabin, mocking, cruel, laced with false entitlement. He called the mountain man a thief for sheltering what was broken, called the children orphans that belonged to no one, spoke of land and power, as if he alone had the right to decide who deserved to live. His men joined in, their jeers slithering through the storm. The woman squeezed her eyes shut, ashamed of the tears spilling over. She had feared this moment would come, that cruelty always returns to reclaim what it tries to destroy. The mountain man rose to his full height, shoulders broad enough to cast a shadow that swallowed the fire light. He moved the door with steps slow, but certain every line of his body, a quiet refusal. He opened it against the storm, letting snow blast inside, the wind carrying the scent of horses and sweat. He stood in the threshold like a wall carved from stone, his hair whipping in the gale, his eyes fixed on the figures before him. The rancher smirked from the saddle, his coat lined with fur, his arrogance unbent by the weather. He called out again, louder, demanding the woman and children be turned out, sneering that they were nothing but weight to drag a man down. He spat the word worthless like poison into the night. His men chuckled behind him, their shapes barely visible through the snow. The mountain man did not answer at first. His silence was heavier than the storm, pressing back against every cruel word. He stood unmoving while the wind tore at him, while snow buried his boots, while the rancher's laughter grew louder. At last his voice came low and steady, carrying through the roar of the blizzard like the strike of an iron bell. He said the children were not gone, that they would never be gone while he drew breath. He said their mother was not worthless, not broken, not cast aside. He said she was his to guard now, and the little ones were his to raise, not by blood, but by vow. His words were not shouted, but forged, each one hammered in fire and stone. When he finished, the storm itself seemed to pause as though listening. The rancher sneered, his laughter cracking against the night, but there was unease behind his eyes. He spat into the snow, barked that the mountain man would regret it, that no vow could stand against men like him. Then he tugged his rez and turned, his companions following, their shapes vanishing into the white. Their laughter lingered, but it carried the thin edge of something unsettled. The mountain man closed the door, shutting out the storm's bite. His face was calm, but his chest rose and fell with quiet fire. The woman stared at him, her tears unchecked. She had heard vows before, empty words thrown like scraps. But this was different. His promise had weight. It had carved itself into the cabin walls, into the air, into her heart that had thought itself too shattered to feel. The girl crawled closer to him, her small hand reaching for his coat. She whispered that he had sounded like a father when he spoke. The mountain man knelt, lowering himself. So his eyes met hers and placed his scarred hand gently over her fist. His silence held more than words could. The newborns whimpered, then quieted as though soothed by the rhythm of his breathing. The woman could not speak. Her throat burned with all she wanted to say, that she was unworthy of such a vow, that she was afraid to believe it, that her heart had been broken too many times. But when she looked at him, kneeling with her daughter's hand in his, she felt something shift inside her. The chains of shame that had bound her began to loosen, if only slightly. For the first time, she let herself imagine that her children might grow in safety, that love might exist without cruelty hiding behind it. The storm raged on outside, the wind rattling the roof and piling snow against the door. Inside the cabin glowed with firelight, its shadows long across the floor. The mountain man rose once more, taking the axe in his hand and setting it near the hearth. His eyes met the woman's across the room, and though no words passed between them, the vow still echoed, unchanging, unbroken, a line drawn against the darkness. She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. For the first time since her legs were shattered, she let herself breathe deeply, fully, as if air had returned to lungs that thought they had emptied for good. Yet even in that fragile peace, she knew the rancher would return. Cruelty does not vanish. It circles, waiting, patient as hunger, and when it came again, it would not be laughter and mockery alone. It would come to break what it could not claim. The fire hissed, the newborn shifted, and the girl fell asleep against the mountain man's arm. The woman kept her eyes on him, memorizing the shape of him by firelight, knowing that her fate and her children's lives now hung upon the strength of his vow. And though the storm outside battered the walls, it was not the sound of the wind that filled her ears as she drifted into uneasy rest. It was the echo of his words, ringing in the silence like a promise the world itself will be forced to reckon with. Spring crept into the valley like a secret, first in the faint dripping from the eaves, then in the darker soil that peeked through patches of snow. The pines no longer groaned beneath their frozen weight, and the air carried a gentler breath, cool yet softened by the promise of renewal. The cabin stood sturdier than it had in storm's fury, its roof patched, its hearthstone clean, its timbers seasoned by smoke and survival. Within its walls, the woman sat by the open doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her legs stretched awkwardly before her, still bound in splints. The pain was a constant companion, yet not the master it once had been. In her lap, one of the newborns stirred, blinking into the tender light. Beside her, the others slept in the cradle, while the girl played in the yard with the wooden horse, her laughter, a music the house had long hungered for. The mountain man worked outside, splitting logs with steady strokes, the axe biting into the wood with the rhythm of inevitability. His shirt clung damp with effort, his breath rising in faint clouds, though the air was warmer now. Each swing seemed less an act of survival than of preparation, a shaping of tomorrow's fire from today's labor. From time to time his eyes drifted to the girl, then to the woman in the doorway, as though checking the ground he had sworn to guard was still his to hold. The woman watched him quietly, her thoughts layered with fear and gratitude. She remembered the rancher's voice, mocking and sharp, promising to return. She knew cruelty did not vanish with one storm's retreat. Yet when her gaze fell upon a mountain man, his scars glinting with sweat and sun, she felt her heartbeat settle. He did not speak much, and still she had come to understand him better than men who had filled rooms with noise. His silence carried weight, his presence carried steadiness, and his vow lingered in the air like a post driven deep into the earth. The girl came running back to the porch, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. She held the horse high above her head, asking if he might carve her another, maybe a mother horse to keep this one company. The mountain man nodded once, wiping the handle of the axe with his sleeve, and she beamed as if he had given her gold. She darted past her mother into the cabin, already making plans for where the new toy would sleep. The woman laughed softly, though the sound broke into a sob halfway, for joy and sorrow often touched each other too closely. When the sun began to dip, painting the horizon with bands of rose and fire, the mountain man stacked the final log against the wall and came to stand at the threshold. He looked down at the woman, her face illuminated by the last light of the day. For a long moment, neither spoke. The children's quiet breaths filled the cabin. The faint trickle of meltwater sang beyond the pines. At last she lifted her gaze to him and whispered that she was afraid, that she could not run if cruelty returned, could not shield her children if the world demanded more than she could give. Her words trembled, but she forced them free because fear left unspoken grows heavier. He listened, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. When she finished, he stepped forward, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. His hand, rough and scarred, found hers in her lap. He told her not in many words, but in the way he held her fingers with a gentleness that refused to let go, that she was not alone. His silence did not erase her fear, but it carried it differently, like two shoulders lifting the same burden. The girl peeked from behind the doorframe, watching. She whispered again the words she had spoken before, that he felt like a father. This time the woman did not flinch at the sound, though her tears returned. She let them fall freely, washing away the last of her resistance. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and let her eyes meet his once more, allowing herself to believe that perhaps fate had given her not ruin, but renewal. The night came softly, stars pricking through the dark, the air still but full of echoes. Inside the fire glowed low, embers pulsing like a heart refusing to dim. The mountain man sat near it, the girl curled at his side, the newborn safe in their cradle, the woman resting with her shawl drawn close. For the first time, she allowed her body to ease, to believe in the shelter they had built together. Outside, the world still waited. The rancher's shadow still stretched. Cruelty still stalked the edges of the land. But within those walls, a vow had been made, unbroken and unbreakable. And as the flames crackled, painting light across the scarred face of the man who had claimed them as his own, the woman felt a truth settled deep within her chest that tomorrow would come. And when it did, they would face it not as broken fragments, but as a family forged in fire and silence.